I'm Matt Gordinick from RackForms, and in this video, we're going to talk about a really interesting and important topic, which is repeatable data. So it turns out that one of the more common things that we might want to do in a form is to have something like this. So I have a table called patient, and patient, as far as content goes, is a patient ID and a patient name. So the idea is I want to add records to this database. The thing is, what if patient was tied to a larger structure? So maybe like patient visit, or maybe let's say clinic. So a clinic then kind of has patients that are tied to it. The other example I like to use is a baseball team, or really any sports team. So you have a team and then you have players on that team. And the idea is we want to define both the team and the players. And that doesn't mean that the team doesn't already exist. It just means that we have multiple items that we want to attach to one thing. Now, in RackForms, we do have a couple different ways of doing this. So one of the most common ways we do it is I would have, let's say, a text field, and this would be, let's say, team name. So this is information about the team, and maybe I'd have a separator, and after this then I'd have a bucket, and the bucket then would have the player information. So this would be, for example, player name, and then we'd have maybe position and stats, etc. And I want to have one or more players that I add to the form. And the way I do this then is I select the bucket and I say, make this a repeatable bucket. And what this is going to do then is this going to say, here's a little control that I can then press that's going to allow me to add multiple records to this. The way we sort of process this then on the form side is pretty simple. It's just click the plus button and we get a new record added. To actually insert these records then to the database, we'd usually have a submission page, and this now, by the way, gets us into where the sort of complexity of why this is a tricky operation sometimes. But I would have a SQL plus item right here, and I would say under bucket repeater processing mode, I'd say one row, and usually I do original item because I want all items. And then what this is going to do is it's going to insert into, for example, and we're using kind of teams and patients interchangeably here. But I'm going to insert this into patient, and the field that I want to write is patient name. And I have a single value, and the variable that I'm going to use then is, well, again, we're using patients and players a little bit variable here, but I'm going to say player name. So I have this table where I have one or more players, and I'm going to be inserting to the database right here. And when I run this now, I would say, let's say Matt, and then let's say Steve. And when I submit this, I go to my submission page, and in my database, I now have that new record. Now, if I want to actually insert the multiple records, I would select the bucket that I want, and now you'll notice that for every item that I add, it's going to add its bucket items as well. So we go to submission page. In the database, there's Matt and Steve. So that is how we can sort of process our bucket items using SQL Plus and write to a database. And this is fine in many cases, but there are a few limitations to this. And a lot of this mainly has to do with security. But the biggest limitation with this is we can't actually have dynamic elements processing within the bucket. So I can't, for example, have a select menu like this right here that uses a query from a data source to actually populate its values. And again, we do this for security reasons because dynamic elements like this have a lot of sort of exploitable surface area, and we don't quite feel comfortable yet sort of allowing this as a thing that we can do without making sure we can do it absolutely securely. And so because there are ways that this could somehow turn out bad for us, we just don't unfortunately support it. And so this is really useful in those times where we just have textual data, which is a lot of forms, and but there are times when you need more complex structures. And so that's what we want to take a look at next. So I'm going to get rid of this bucket right here. And we're going to take a look at a slightly different way of doing this. And this is actually sort of a kind of a larger topic within RackForms. We often like to call this application development because that's what we use this technique for. But it's also really useful for other things like what we're about to see. So what I mean by this is, let's imagine for a second here the structure of the database that I would be using to capture this data. So I have a team name, which is kind of like a thing that we do once. You have one team name, maybe we have one team captain, the team's address, team's phone number. Those elements go into the database once. But as I already discussed, I'm going to have one or more, in this case, players. And so these players then need to, from a database perspective, be separated off from the team information. So players would be a one-to-many relationship to a, let's say, team table. And again, in this case, we're using patients. So we would say we have a clinic, and then a clinic has its own patients. We have another clinic, it has its own patients. And by the way, there could be overlap in there too, but what I really want to kind of do is just get us to think along the ideas of sort of application development. And so in this case, patient is going to be multiple patients, multiple rows. So what if I were to do this? So here I have my form here. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to call this, instead of team name, I'm going to call this player. And I'm just going to kind of change my form around here real quick so it's kind of more, actually, we call this clinic as well. Just so we kind of match our database here. I'm talking about patients after all. So I have this clinic field right here. And I have a field called patient. And then patient is going to be the thing that I want repeated. And so if I were to build this form using the simplest possible technique, I might use the SQL Plus Automator to go in and say write to the patient table. So I'm going to say there's patient. The field name that I'm going to be writing to is patient name. So I'm going to change this to match the exact column name in the database. And I'm just going to say add an SQL Plus item. And what RackForms has done for us now is said insert into patient, patient name, and then the value that we're going to be writing is this form field right here. And when I run this form now, I can put in a new value. Oops, and I do need a submit button here. Form doesn't make much sense without one. So here's a new patient. I'll hit submit. It goes to the submission page, and there's the new patient. I can go back then, and I can put in Steve, submit this patient, and sure enough, there's Steve. And so what's interesting about this now is what if I were to put in on my submission page a redirect? And the redirect is going to go back to this page, page0.php. Well, now we've created a little efficiency. We're going to page0.php. So add another patient, and now we just redirect automatically back to the first page. Now it looks like, because it happened so fast, that maybe nothing happened, but sure enough, we're just writing results now. So we can put in Jan, automatically redirects, but it's also written that result to the database. So you might be thinking now, well, what if I were to put this within a larger structure? So here I'm saying clinic. I'm actually going to call this patient now, and we're just going to say this is literally the patient form. But I have another form page, which is called clinic. So here's clinic, and I'm actually going to name my pages here. It's very important when you start kind of building these forms out that you kind of manage the page names. So I'm just going through here and I'm just naming my pages so they make sense, and I'm going to make sure then that this page submits to the correct place too. So patient submits to patient, or submit patient. And so now what we kind of think of is we have this little loop within here. So I access the patient page and it automatically submits a new patient using this submission page right here. It then redirects back to patient. By the way, let's fix this redirect so it goes back to the correct place. And so now if I try to access this page, I go to clinic. So this is the first thing I want to real quick mention here, that when I build a form like this, by default, RackForms is a form application first. So it's always going to enforce that every page that I have in my form should be visited before the next page. And in this case, I'm trying to access patient, but it goes to clinic. And that actually makes sense from the default version of RackForms, or the way it works, because I should go to clinic first. I can't just skip to the second page of the form. And so what I need to do in these cases is I need to say page not required for every form page in my job. So anything with an F right up here, you just say this is a form page and it can be skipped. So that's why I check this little box. Now I can just directly access patient. And so at this point then, again, I'm just going to start naming these so they're a little bit easier to see. Then we're putting new ones in. So I have patient, which is just going to keep going back to patient. Again, same as we saw before. The only difference now is that I now have this other page called clinic. So here's the interesting thing. What if I were to take the embed code of this page and then within the clinic page add a code block that contains that iframe? So this will embed the patient page within the clinic page. And sure enough, if I run this, there's clinic, but then there's patient. And of course, I can put in a new patient, and just the iframe refreshes now. See that? That's the big secret right there. Just the iframe refreshes. So as far as we're concerned right here, I'm now adding records, but I would still have the larger structure of the clinic page up here. So that's really neat. So now what I could possibly do to this is I could add another page. This is the real cool part right here. I could add another page, a builder page, and I could say, build me a query that shows me the patient ID and patient name. And just build a basic template to show me that data. And when I run this, now instead of having to look in the database for this information, I can just look at this little form page. So cool, there's my patient information. But same as we embedded this page using an iframe, I can also do this right here. I can embed this page, this builder page, into the patient page. So I can, after this little item right here, I can add another code block. And I can embed the iframe there. And now look what we get. Now we get a page right here where I'm adding a patient. I hit submit. And this builder page is going to show me all the patients in the system. So I could add sample 3. And because when I press submit, it's going to go to the submission page and redirect back here. And because this right here is the builder page that's embedded in this page, this is automatically going to redraw. We don't have to tell it to redraw. It's an HTML page. This is an HTML command that says grab me this page, which is the builder page. And so that's all it's going to do. It's just going to say, okay, great. We're just going to go ahead and redraw that page. So when I press submit, it redraws. And sure enough, this table updates essentially in real time. It's like magic. And so the idea then is, what if I were to actually change this builder page to a multi-update and delete, so that now I can actually delete these records right here and update them. Now when I go to the patient page, it's even more powerful. I have this form right here that allows me to say, you know what, I actually don't want any of these guys update. But oh man, sample 1 is actually going to play for us. No problem. So now we've created this cool little structure here where I can modify, delete, update records, and all of these guys, this is the important thing here, all these guys now follow the same powerful rules and systems that are available to every other thing that we do on RackForms. So in other words, this is just a standard form page, right? So this patient that I have right here, this is just a simple text field, but now I can have my select menus that are powered by database objects. I can have AJAX calls. I can have all the powerful stuff that I want built right into this form. And I kind of break out of all those restrictions that we had with using the repeater. Again, repeaters are great if we're doing simple textual-based data. And I shouldn't even say simple. It can be a really complex form. It's just that we can't have lots of complex or potentially dangerous operations within a bucket repeater. However, using this technique, well, now we can have all the powerful tools available in RackForms, and we just build this simple structure right here. Well, simple when you do it a couple times. We can build a structure right here, and this is going to allow us to kind of loop through records, add and delete them at will, and then when we do our final submission, then we would actually tie all our records together. Now, that tying all records together piece is actually something that I haven't quite touched on just yet. And the reason why is because it's a little bit more advanced, because what we need to do now is we need to make sure that when I'm inserting these records into the database, that I make sure that I can relate these back to any other related tables. And that is for another video. So if you're going to set up a job like this, maybe do this part first, and then we'll have hopefully a link to that second video in the description of this one. And then we can do that final little step where we basically go through and we create a unique identifier so that every time we insert related records, we can relate them back to any master tables that we have. So I'll leave it at that for now. As always, like we say here, please let us know if this helps at info over at rackforms.com.